Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here representing Jason Blaha Strength and Fitness, and today I want to chat with you guys and gals a little bit about the fact that stimulus to fatigue is just an excuse to train lazy. It is not based on science, but a quick reminder, if you guys will please click like down below, drop me a comment down under the video. Also, I'd appreciate it so much. Let's get over into this topic. All right, this is something that people bring up continually, and it's coming out of the evidence-based lifting circles, and here's the problem with it. They're calling it evidence-based or science-based, but there is no evidence or science to support it. So let's be clear on this. This is not even a case of science versus bros. This is a case of lazy versus evidence. Let's be clear, there has never been a single study done on stimulus to fatigue. This is not something that's been studied in the lab. The entire concept of it even comes from the idea that people want to maximize volume because they're having certain circles that are telling you, well, we need to do as much volume as we possibly can, that more volume always equals more growth and less, recovery gets in the way. And so if we look at the stimulus to fatigue, we can do even more total sets. We could do more work in the gym and recover from it. But, again, suboptimal sets, right? They're not hard sets. They'll pick the easiest exercises so that they can just chase more volume. But the reality is this is lower stimulus, right? When you get into all this stuff, this is just less stimulus. The problem is when they're looking at stuff like stimulus to fatigue, it's saying stuff like, well, a deadlift, like I'm doing a conventional deadlift, which by the way, I do rep work with 500 pounds 3 times a week on the deadlift. I recover just fine. I'm 48 years old. I'm not blasting gear either. So let's be clear on that. I am 48, almost 49. I recover just fine deadlifting heavy 3 days a week, just like this set you saw right there, knocking down 5 reps of 500 pounds. Okay. They'll say, well, that's equal set just for hamstrings, right? So they're talking about stimulus to fatigue as if the deadlift doesn't grow like 8 different muscles in the body. This is the problem with these ideas. It's a stimulus to fatigue. It's like, well, you could get more sets for your hamstrings if we just did a hamstring curl. Well, okay. But do you really think your hamstrings are going to be the biggest because of that? And I think that's the problem. I got pretty big hamstrings. All I do these days is deadlift for my hamstrings. It's not like I haven't done other stuff. I got a reverse hyper and a glute ham raise right there. I don't even have any of this high stimulus to fatigue equipment. I don't have any. Yet I have big hamstrings. You have seen me pull over 600 pounds in the past. Okay? I don't have access to any of this equipment. But it's not just about me, is it? So back over to that point. Look, they'll put out this idea, but here's the problem. It's never been studied. And here's the point I would make. When I say the stimulus to fatigue, you don't have direct studies ever trying to compare maximum volumes in recovery and to see which grows the most muscle. Okay? In other words, you don't have a single study anywhere showing that a hamstring curl is superior to a deadlift for hypertrophy. All right? This has not been studied. And here's what we find. All the studies that do look at big versus small exercises determine that the big exercises grow the muscles just as much. In other words, every study that compares isolation to compound thus far has generally found, with a few exceptions, rows don't grow the biceps optimally, but lat pull downs and pull-ups do. Okay, see where I'm going there? But okay, you got a few examples, but by and large, the studies and research out there has actually determined that compound movements grow the primary movers just as much as an isolation movement does. There's no real difference. See where I'm about to go there? That's what the evidence shows. You don't have any studies looking at this whole stimulus to fatigue idea and comparing it. It's not based on evidence. So, when this gets brought up and people say, well, we're talking, this is science-based. What science? You mean it's based on a hypothesis? It's based on a theory? Okay? Let me reiterate. You do not have actual evidence of this. It has not been studied. Therefore, it's not science-based. And you can call it that all that you want. Okay? You can call it that. You can say, hey, this is evidence-based. But you don't have evidence, and you don't have science to support it. Right? And when we look at the available science, we find that these big movements grow these muscles just as much. Well, here's the problem. They're going to stand there and make these claims, but when they're talking stimulus fatigue, well, these bigger exercises, a bench press is a lot of fatigue, a deadlift's a lot of fatigue, right? Whatever, the bigger the movement. Well, obviously it's more fatigue. Obviously a deadlift creates more fatigue than a hamstring curl machine. This is a given. You don't have evidence that the hamstring curl has more growth potential than the hamstring. Here's the other problem. If you're going to try to pick all these, we're just working less muscle. Generally speaking, when we look at the big exercises, all these big high fatigue exercises, they all cause huge amounts of growth. When they're studied, they cause multiple muscles to grow, right? Squat doesn't just cause the quads to grow, it gets enormous glute growth. In fact, it's one of the best glute exercises, if not the best that's ever been found in studies. The adductors, the glutes, the quads, even the calves grow from squats. Yes, it's a high fatigue exercise, but it causes all this to grow. We've also even found in studies look at it causes the upper body to grow. So does the deadlift. So people will even argue, well, the leg press is better stimulus to fatigue or whatever machine, but does it cause the upper body to grow? Well, no. So are you sure that you're getting more total muscle growth for the amount of fatigue? Just because the squat's more fatigue doesn't mean that there's evidence, right? Doesn't mean that there's evidence that it causes less growth. Because these bigger movements that have all, because that's really all the fatigue means. Well, yeah, exercises that create a whole lot of fatigue is a whole lot of muscles are being worked, a lot of weights being moved. But they cause just as much stimulus. All right, this is a problem. This is a major problem to try to claim then that there's evidence of this, because what does it do? It promotes lazy training. All that this is doing is promoting lazy training and being afraid of big exercises. Okay? But this isn't based on science, and it's not based on the real world. Historically, no one had problems getting big on big basic movements, right? Guys knew this back in the day. They all got big and jacked. They knew that the big exercises built the most muscle and worked the most muscle. They found it to be true. Guys got jacked on squats, bench, deadlifts, pull-ups, rows, overhead pressing, dips, right? Front squats, all this stuff. Guys got really big and jacked on it for decades. In fact, the only reason machines and a lot of these other movements are more popular is because of the drugs. Because of the drugs, because guys can't train, and I've done videos on that. Too many drugs makes it harder to do much volume on some of these big movements because of the low back pumps, the lack of conditioning, being too big. Okay? Not the fatigue, it's these other issues. But the issue is, they don't cause a disproportionate amount of fatigue to their muscle growth. They cause multiple muscles to grow. And the same thing, people over here talking about volume. Well, we want more, but you're getting lots of volume on this. Do you not understand how much volume throughout different muscles in your body squats and deadlifts do? They are hitting huge amounts of volume to these different muscles, and they do cause enormous amounts of muscle growth in these different muscles, right? So, as a result of this, people are just being lazy and they're scared of the big exercises and they believe that it's evidence-based. That's the problem. It's being used as an excuse to train lazy. Well, the stimulus to fatigue and I can isolate this muscle more, but that's not evidence-based. The evidence shows that isolating muscles does nothing for making them bigger. That a big compound builds the muscles as long as it's a primary mover and the hard sets close to failure causes just as much muscle growth. And it's not an issue of one more volume. No, you mean you can spend more time? because you got like 8 different muscles being worked on a squat or a deadlift that are all getting growth stimulus based on the evidence. This is just people training lazy. That's all that it is. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.